This episode of The Minimalists is brought to you by nobody, because advertisements suck.
This podcast has bad words.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to The Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together we are The Minimalists.
Today, we're going to talk about our obsessions with trends and fashion, and we're going to dissect our infatuation with clothing and style and also shoes. And we're going to do that with today's guest. Now, it's Tyler Jones, although Tyler isn't your name, Tyler.
It's not, no, and it's a terrible fake name as well, I would say. But yeah, that's me for now.
So I want to dive into this. So you started this Instagram account called PreachersNSneakers.
Yes.
And if you're watching this on YouTube right now, you'll notice that you can't see Tyler's face because he is this anonymous person behind PreachersNSneakers. Let's talk.
Would you say they called you the Christian Banksy?
Yeah, several have. Yeah, which I wear with pride. I
absolutely.
can't think of a better compliment.
Absolutely.
So this account fascinates me. Now, Ryan and I have different religious beliefs. We have different political beliefs, and I think that's what makes this podcast resonate with a lot of people, because we have atheists on, we have Christians, we have everyone in between, and it's quite often not even about beliefs. And today we're not even really going to be talking about religious beliefs, although I think that will come into the conversation. Our beliefs in general will come into the conversation. What I want to talk about is this obsession we have with fashion, and I think no one has done that in a more artistic way that has spurred conversation recently than you.
Thank you.
Let's talk about what happened. How did PreachersNSneakers start, for those who are not in the know yet?
So as most young married men do when their wives are out of town, I was sitting on my couch watching worship videos on YouTube. So like, you guys have differing religious beliefs. I'm a Christian, been for the majority of my life, and I never do this, but for whatever reason that morning I slept through church and was just watching worship videos on YouTube. There was a song that I liked called Resurrecting by Elevation Worship, which is, one of the larger worship bands right now. And I was watching the video and I noticed the lead singer, who's not the lead singer anymore, but his name's Mac Brock, was wearing this pair of Yeezy 750s. And at that time, I had been into sneakers for maybe 3 or 4 years, and I very quickly realized, oh, these shoes resell for $800. And for whatever, I think I was either under or over caffeinated, and I just started to feel some type of irritation, like how do you reconcile this? And I wasn't this articulate at the time, or I'm not articulate now, but I just was very frustrated, and I couldn't understand, wait, this dude's leading worship for thousands of people, and he's wearing shoes that are worth more than most of their rent, I would assume.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, what kind of message is that sending?
Right.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was like, I can guarantee that most people don't understand how much these shoes are worth. And then, YouTube serves up recommended videos for after those videos, and I started realizing there's a ton of pastors and worship leaders that are wearing all these super hyped up sneakers and streetwear. And so I just made a few videos on my personal Instagram and just said, hey, did you know that Mac Brock is wearing $800 Yeezys, or y'all's friend Erwin is wearing $900 off-white Jordan 1s? To my personal Instagram, I have like 400 followers. I'm a nobody. I know nothing. Like, I'm just a regular dude. And I had a buddy that actually lives out here who's a DJ. He's like, hey, dude, you should start an account just doing that. It could be the next viral thing. And I said, I don't think so. But I mean, I love making people laugh, and liked how people were responding to the things I did on my personal Instagram. And so I thought about it for a few days, and the name, I just started thinking, like, what rhymes with like preachers or pastors or deacons? And immediately sneakers. I said PreachersNSneakers.
And there's a double entendre there,
right?
Obviously.
And it's like like IN as well as A&D sneakers. And so I made the account, and I copied those posts over, and within 4 weeks I had 100,000 followers.
It's crazy.
The New York Times is calling, and I'm like, dude, I don't know what I just did.
Like,
now, so let's talk a bit about this. So what you found also is, and this is one of those rare examples where social media actually leads to healthy conversation in a lot of instances. The comment section has in many ways become this artistic space in and of itself, right?
Yeah. And it's there's plenty of people that are more funny and more educated than I am in the comment section. And that was the thing that was so surprising, how we were talking about earlier, like fans of your podcast are atheists and religious and questioning and all this. And all of those same types of people were coming in the comment section, because the universal thing is everyone felt a certain type of way about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't know what to do with it because they were served up, oh, this person is wearing $1,200 shoes. I don't know how to feel about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I think caused so many people to get riled up one way or the other.
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I first saw Preachers and Sneakers, I had this visceral reaction, like you did when you saw the Yeezys. But then I started digging into it, and I'm like so torn on it now. Yeah. Because it's, I could see both sides of it. And maybe we'll get more into that in the Maximal episode. But
yeah, I think so. And also, Tyler, so you, in fact, I made sure not to ask your name beforehand so I wouldn't screw it up because I don't want to do the big reveal. And so you had this quote, I think it was in a Complex article. You said, "As I have processed the growth of this account, however, it has caused me to examine my own life and how I spend my money because it's not much different." So in a way, while you were reflecting and you were judging other people in a way at first, I think now what you do isn't a judgment so much as it is you're setting up a discussion board almost, a community discussion board, but it's made you look inward as well and start to examine your own life.
Yeah, I still hold to that. I wasn't judging anyone. I was at least trying to understand why I felt a certain type of way about it. Like why naturally I was averse to the idea that pastors and worship leaders could either be gifted such nice things or make enough money to where they could just straight up be buying these type of things.
Right.
It's still up for discussion, kind of like Ryan. I've seen behind the curtain on some of these things, and I understand the nuance around some of the situations. Like at a micro level, there are variables that all of us don't get aren't privy to, and change the narrative a little bit.
Yeah.
What was your original question? Sorry.
Well, no, it's changed your own mind.
Oh, yeah.
In a way. So are you looking at the shoes you buy now a little bit differently?
Yeah, I mean, it made me really, really take inventory of my own social media presence and question why I was posting what I post. Because at least in Christian circles, a lot of what we post on social media is really, if you get deep down into it, is to make other people jealous at some level of our lives.
Oh, wow.
And so and I had to repent of that myself, saying like, oh, I had these courtside seats and I posted all about it because I wanted people to know that I got this sweet hookup or that I was on this sweet vacation or had this dope meal. And at least in Christian circles, I mean, causing people to envy your life is sin.
Yeah.
And so I had to really like go back and say, oh, why? Like it's really caused me to reflect on why I post on social media and really try to take the log out of my own eye.
Yeah.
Even though it's been imperfect and it's been messy, and you guys have seen the comments, like critics of mine will say this is not a healthy discussion, but it is a discussion, and it's caused people to do the same.
Well, I mean, I think we should have a little bit of that discussion. We have some listener questions we're going to get to here in a moment, but I thought what was fascinating is Ryan saw that, had that visceral reaction at first. I actually had a different visceral reaction, and I think you and we, the minimalists in our community, we are actually talking about the same problem, which I think is overindulgent consumerism, but we're tackling it from different angles. And I actually don't have much of a problem with pastors. I mean, I shouldn't say much. I don't have any problem with a pastor wearing expensive shoes because I think they work a job and they can do whatever they want with that money. The same way I don't care whether or not you wear expensive shoes. Right. However, I actually have more of a problem with just your average person like me and Ryan, who aren't, you know, fashion critics or whatever, spending money. Actually, we're not even average because we have this audience or whatever. But like, Podcast Sean, for example, if he started wearing $800 Yeezys, I would start to question his priorities. Yeah. In a way, and now that maybe that's me. You know, judgment is but a mirror, right? And it reflects the insecurities of the person who's doing the judging. So if I were to look at Sean and say, hey, I'm not going to say it out loud, but I'm going to look at that and say, wow, he really prioritizes this expensive footwear. And why is he doing that? Is it a personal belief? Is it a mimetic belief? We'll get into some of that today as well. But when I look at someone like him, just spending $800 on sneakers, that would seem frivolous to me. But when I see someone who is influential, I'm really fascinated by people who influence other people. Now that could be someone like Erwin McManus, like you mentioned. His church is right across the street from here.
I watched y'all's conversation. Great looking guy.
And by the way, we just did another thing with him for Netflix, and he talks about some things in a way that that I think we could talk about some today. But he shows up, he's the most dapper person in the room, and he's not dressed differently from me. I swear to you, he was wearing a black shirt and black pants, and somehow he's
got swag.
He was dressed so much better than me. I'm like, we're wearing the same outfit.
Yeah,
what is going on? And now the shoes that I think you posted him wearing some expensive shoes, and they were gifted to him. He said, which I mean I don't have any reason not to believe that.
Right.
And when I see that, I also see that he's trying to resonate with a particular community, right? And so by wearing something, it used to be we wore our Sundays best, right? To if we go to church. I grew up Catholic, right? And we were the original prosperity gospel, right? And we'll talk more about that as well. But the church I go to, people were wearing suits and ties, and now it's streetwear, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, because now isn't it in many ways the same, but just a more progressive version of that?
Yeah, it might be. Although, so people bring up the suits all the time, and the difference in the suits to me is that there were rarely brand names associated with those suits, and so it was a little harder to tell if this dude was wearing a $300 suit or a $10,000 Armani.
Do you remember John
suit.
Edwards?
That's a great point.
The politician John Edwards. He was So he would be a common man. He would take his Armani suits, take the tag out, and have them sew in a J.C. Penney's tag.
Oh wow!
So he was being deceptive. He could have just removed the Armani tag, and no one would have known, right?
Right.
But he wanted to show you that he was the average man by putting.
So isn't that interesting how brands communicate something?
Yes.
And so that's the deeper discussion about, okay, if you're saying that you represent the creator of the universe, or you're pouring into a congregation of people and not trying to have wisdom with what you wear, are you being foolish? Because I think most people would agree that what you wear sends a message, especially if you're wearing a brand name.
Yeah.
And to go back to what you said about Podcast Sean, if he showed up in $800 shoes, I agree. Like, I don't have an issue with him having those shoes, but I would have an issue if he was living off of tithes and donations. And so that's the rub for a lot of people, is it's hard to reconcile those two things, where or that's why it blew up so significantly, I think, is because people have this understanding like, all right, pastors live off tithes and offerings, yet they're wearing $1,000 shoes.
But many of the ones you feature aren't living off tithes and offerings, right?
And then it brings up a follow-up question like, all right, so they're not living off tithes and offerings, but they're building a congregation, writing books on pastor time, and then selling it to that existing platform that they've built as a pastor. And so it just brings up all these deep things that I, as a normal nothing dude, kind of maybe scratch the surface of with the sneakers. And that's why people get so fired up, because there's all these different elements to it.
You know what got me fired up is one of the articles I was reading, I don't know if it was with the Times or if it was Vice, but it was talking about how these churches will start to make their own swag, and they create this false demand. And I think that is that's promoting materialism, and that is where I have a problem with any organization that's leading people to promote materialism. But that's me. Yeah. If I'm at a church and a pastor is wearing an $800 pair of shoes, like, I get to decide whether or not I support that pastor. Personally, I wouldn't, but someone else would, and I'm not going to knock someone for choosing to support a pastor who's wearing $800 shoes.
But what if that pastor they're $800 shoes because that's the resale value, right?
Yeah. Unless it's like designer stuff. Generally, I post like the retail value of designer stuff because it's ridiculous, as on the retail side.
Sure. So, but what if they didn't pay anything for those sneakers? Now we have people who offer us free stuff all the time. We always decline it, just as a rule. But I'm not saying
give them my address. If you want.
No, well, so the if they're given to them, it still is promoting materialism. It's just a step away And this is what's so funny about this whole conversation. There's this line. It's such a gray area because to me it's only one step away from like wearing a Nike swoosh when they're preaching and when they're on the stage. Now it's not as obvious as a Nike swoosh. Like most people wouldn't have noticed what you noticed in that video with the $800 pair of shoes. Yeah. But people would definitely notice a Nike swoosh. So it's a little bit more indiscreet, but still it's promoting materialism. And it's not about like, you know, what could they have done with that $800? Maybe they could have like redone the upholstery on the, you know, on the church benches, or like, that's not really the problem I have as much as creating the need with the congregation of, oh, my pastor wears those shoes, so like now I need to go wear those shoes. And that is that's where I have an issue. Not only that, but it would be like if we started wearing Rolexes. Yeah, because the whole conversation about drawing in a younger crowd, like I get that. But that would be like Josh and I saying, hey, you know what? Because we want to show that minimalism isn't about quantity. It's about quality. So we bought Rolexes because we want to appease a certain crowd. We want to appease the maximalists who feel like, you know, minimalism is about the stuff. But see, we got Rolexes. It's okay to have Rolexes.
Right. And here's the thing. I actually think it's okay for you to have a Rolex, and there are probably good uses. I mean, initially it was a diving instrument. Like, it was the best diving watch, and that's why people had it. And then it became a status symbol out of that, right? I assume the same is true with a lot of sort of fashion. It starts in a way that is useful. But speaking about Erwin McManus, he said, I think quite often we confuse minimalism when I was interviewing him for this Netflix thing. Quite often we confuse minimalism with utilitarianism. Yeah. And I think the problem there is that beauty is essential. Yeah. And so I think aesthetics are important. We all believe aesthetics are important, and maybe sometimes what we're trying to do with the sort of, if you go to Mosaic, by the way, it's the most beautiful building you'll ever walk in. Yeah, it's gorgeous. Aggressively minimalist. It's absolutely stunning. And none of that's a brand name. It's not like there's the stage is brought to you by Nike or whatever, right? But there are sometimes we rely on brands. I try not to personally, especially outward facing brands. We rely on brands as a shortcut toward quality or something else. Maybe. Unfortunately, I think that's the unfortunate side. But sometimes it's just like Ryan and I both drive Toyotas. We're not sponsored by Toyota, but like I know that the Toyota has worked really well for me, and anytime I've deviated from it, I've regretted it in the past, and so I've gone back to Toyota, and that works well for me. Although I was just in Nashville a few weeks ago, and the rental car place was out of most cars, and they tried to give me like a BMW, and I'm like, that's too fancy for me. Like I because I'm afraid of the image I'm going to project. Now I was also going to be hanging out with Dave Ramsey then, so I really didn't want to like drive.
He should have sent you a car, man. You know that guy's got 15 Bentleys or whatever. Ford Raptors, I think is what he drives. Yeah. But isn't that interesting how that concern is valid? Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting to think where that stops. Like at a certain point, like I think even Erwin said it on a podcast very early on when this blew up and people were hitting him up. Like, I don't want to be owned by the mob, or I don't want the opinions of others to dictate how I dress or how I act, which I think is a valid thing because that's living in a prison. But also there's something wisdom related, I think, that you understand what your image communicates, like Instagram specifically. The reason that if it's a gift or not doesn't really matter is that all we have is the context of what you choose to put out there. And so a lot of the content that I put out was just reposting pictures of what these guys had already posted. And all I did was say, this is how much those shoes are worth. And people lost their minds. And now people came back and saying, well, they were a gift. Well, they were a gift. I'm like, all right, that's good to know now. But before it's kind of a catch-22, but also I think what you just said about the declining the BMW is what's at the heart of it. It's like that matters, I think. Yeah.
Again, the same thing. There's nothing wrong with BMW, and by the way, they're also really aesthetically pleasing. They're very well engineered. But at the same,
expensive to repair.
I'm sure they are. Yeah. But at the same time, like, it's what it communicates. I used to drive Lexuses, right? Now I don't now, mainly, well, two reasons. One is they cost a lot more than a Toyota, even though a Toyota is functionally the same thing. But the other thing is what it signals, right? And before it was about status, and I need to signal status. And now for me, I want to avoid the signaling altogether. But maybe in a sort of meta way, that's a different type of, it's meta signaling, right? And so the opposite could be true. We're gonna later we'll have you look at Ryan's and my shoes, and like maybe Ryan.
What are those?
Yeah, seriously. And maybe what Ryan is signaling, what he's wearing. And here's the weird thing about all of this. I believe a lot of the people who are wearing these really high-end things, the Levi Lescos and the Judah Smith and et cetera, and like you said, many of them are gifts. I believe that they're master communicators.
Absolutely.
And they could get on stage barefoot and it would send a different message.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the reason that our friend Rob Bell is so compelling to me. Rob,
I I listened to those conversations too. He's a really interesting guy.
Yeah, he's the most fascinating. I mean, and in fact, he refused to even put a sign on their church because he didn't want any marketing to be involved in bringing people in. So it all had to be sort of word of mouth, and they had this old abandoned mall that they met in Grand Rapids, and 10,000 people showing up a weekend, and there was no signage, and it was aggressively minimal. He didn't want the light shows and the logos and the brands, and people were always trying to get him to sell merch and stuff, and he was like, I can't imagine selling something. And so you could see he was struggling with it, and he was able to talk about that publicly. But now I see the other side of it, and I think it's what Ryan sees. If you really believe in a message, and you think the best way to communicate that message to young people who you think need the message the most and will benefit from it from a protracted lifespan, then is the best way to identify with them to also look like them in a way, and maybe the shortcut to look like them is to dress like them.
Yeah. Maybe, but then you're also, that's putting God in a pretty small box.
Yeah.
Like couldn't a God so big that you believe in reach that demographic without like trivial things like a Nike swoosh? Like that's the thing I go back on, because the argument seems valid. Like the logic is there. Like these guys or girls like this type of clothing, they live this kind of lifestyle. Oh, they probably wouldn't relate well to the guy in the suits and the stuffy pews. Like I know I realize how we got here. Like I understand how we got here, but also at the same end, it's like, dude, it's kind of a thin argument, because there's guys out here like Francis Chan or Tim Keller who don't wear anything flashy, don't go on massive like world tours with a bunch of strobe lights and stuff, and have huge congregations. Although Francis Chan, I think, isn't.
I know who he is, but I don't know who the other guy is.
Tim Keller's is New York City. The church is called Redeemer. He's very big in Christian circles, I guess. Right. So he was famous for reaching a bunch of young professional New Yorkers by being this blazer, khaki pants type dude that just came and was adamant about what he believed and how he is a really good speaker and everything, but no brands, no flash. And so I get the argument. I think it's probably a thin argument, respectfully. Like I think if you believe in a God that created the entire universe, he can probably work. I
don't even think you need to go that far. I think you could just say, like, even like Ryan's and my message, I don't think we necessarily need to wear, the coolest clothes or whatever. And in fact, if Ryan came in here head to toe in Supreme, I'd laugh at him.
I'd laugh at me too.
Right?
Because it was probably fake Supreme.
No, I agree that argument of, well, I do it to draw in the younger crowd, like it seems a bit strawman to me. It seems a little thin. For me, it comes down to, like, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus put on Yeezys? Like, I mean, when you look at what...
Maybe. I think I've asked that question. I think he might.
Well, I mean, sure, it's possible. But when you look at the way Jesus lived, I mean, he was a minimalist. And he didn't go out of his way. In fact, he would chastise the Pharisees and the priests that were gaudy. And, I mean, he went after them personally. So it's possible, it's probably not plausible that Jesus would wear Yeezys.
Let me give you an argument why he might.
Sure.
So first off, was he a minimalist? Yes, definitely. Is Kanye West a minimalist? Yes.
Sure.
And so there are different types of minimalists. It doesn't mean good or bad. Steve Jobs was a minimalist, but he was also a total jerk. So it doesn't mean just because you're a minimalist, you're virtuous as well, right? And so, but I look at Jesus, and let's just say that hypothetically, the man who was Jesus, he performed functionally magic tricks. Now, whether they were miraculous or not, we could have that debate all day, and no one would win. But was that at the time the best way to help people, to draw people into the message? And if so, how different is that from doing something that was the cool thing to do then? Is the cool thing to do now?
But it's different in the sense that he was anti-materialism, and the magic tricks or the miracles did not promote materialism.
And so God.
But yeah, right. And so, but this also comes down to perspective, right? Because you and I, let's say we were looking for a church, like I would not go and support the pastor who was wearing the $800 Yeezys. But you might not have a problem doing that. Sure. And that's the freedom that we have. And I think that's what it comes down to. Like, we need to be able to make our own decision about it. Like, and that's what I like about our podcast is we get to, explore different perspectives. And that's what we're trying to do here is give people different perspectives. But anyone listening to this really needs to decide for themselves, what do they want to support?
Yeah. And one of the best ways to do that is with our wallets and with our other resources, our time, our attention, our energy, our skills. Those are our precious resources, and we often squander them on what's popular. Now, speaking of different perspectives, we have some questions here, so let's dive into some of these. Bree from Orlando has a question for us.
Over the past several years, I've endeavored to be very intentional with any purchases that I make, and I believe they've been successful. The problem that I'm having is that every time I want to bring a new item into my home, I find myself using a tremendous amount of time, energy, and often money to make sure that the purchase aligns with my values. I spend a lot of time researching the purchase, trying to source it on the used market, and if I can't, I try to put a lot of money into making sure I get a quality item that's going to last a long time. As a result, even though I'm buying less and less over time, I find myself more preoccupied with my possessions than ever because I've invested so much into each item. My question is, how can I continue to be intentional with my purchases without feeling so attached to them?
So at first, a few things come up, Tyler. I think quite often we confuse price with quality. That's not always the truth, right? There's often a correlation.
Yeah.
But not always. Now, here's the other problem, is she's always thinking about these things. Now, even after she's purchased them or before she's purchased them, she's worrying about it. And I think that it becomes a bit of an obsession. And I think there are two types of obsessions. There's healthy obsessions. That leads to good creativity and love in many respects. But then there's these unhealthy obsessions that don't serve the greater good in a way. And I think maybe the hype beast culture that we see now, and it's been especially expressed by what's going on Instagram. I mean, that's really been the way for us to see into everyone's life. It makes us obsess about what we have and especially what we don't have.
And in comparison to our peers or people across the world that we've never met. This is something I struggle with all the time. I mean, I am not a minimalist as of now. Would love to get to that point, like if we're being fully transparent.
We'll give you a certificate before you leave.
Oh, thank you so much. Can I get the tattoo as well?
Right. Just 10% of your earnings.
you get $6. You're welcome. This is something I struggle with too. It's like, especially now that I'm becoming more aware, like, oh, ethical fashion is a thing. Like, an ethical supply chain is something, especially if I claim to believe in a God that cares about the poor, widow, and orphan. Like, this is something that I have to think about more, and it's giving me some anxiety. Like, well, where does this stop? Like, where do I have to look at the silk factory that this shirt came from, or do I have to look at the distribution center where the people are working, like the conditions there? And so I resonate with her as far as maybe, I don't know if she's feeling anxiety, but like the stress about thinking too far into or wanting to do the right thing and not understanding, or it owning you, like that whole process or that whole thought process owning you. And something that's helped me, and I do not do this well, like I struggle with my own materialism issues, but giving and serving others to where it's uncomfortable is something that helps me release from that. Like having my things own me, the moment I'm giving to where it hurts, or where I'm helping someone where I know I'm not going to get anything in return, that at least gets me in a headspace that says, hey, this isn't about you, and these things are just worldly, trivial things that really will pass away very quickly. And so that's been something, I don't know if that completely answers her question, but the thing that's helped me have my things not own me is to give to where it hurts and then try to serve others knowing that I'm not going to get anything in return.
Yeah, and you realize many of the things that we obsess about, they don't help us. She talks about doing things that using her time and energy and attention and money appropriately, but many of the things that we acquire, they don't serve the greater good. What I mean by that is they don't add value to our lives. They don't serve a purpose or help us contribute beyond ourselves in a meaningful way. They're really cool on Instagram though.
Yeah. It's interesting. So Julia Shore in her documentary talks about how we're not materialistic enough in the sense that we have this disposable culture. Bree is on this other side where she is so focused on obtaining the most materialistic thing. It's like she's on the other end of the spectrum. I totally agree with what you're saying. Like if she focuses more on giving outwardly, it might take away some of that attention that she's focusing on herself. But here's the thing too, is like you'll never buy the perfect thing. And I'm guilty of it too. It's like we use, Apple computers. I have an iPhone. You dig into take out the slave labor that, Apple uses, but look at what it does to the environment. I mean, there are certain things, there's I don't know.
Post.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's impossible to buy the perfect thing. Bree, I would just say don't beat yourself up too much. Like focus more on giving, focus more on helping others. And yes, like that is where you're going to help give yourself like a good distraction, I guess.
I'd also want to get to the root of that. So like if I'm her, it's probably not the things that are really what she's trying to control. Like if she's trying, as she mentioned, having people come over and trying to be super intentional about what she has in her house, that's something I'd want my community to help me examine. Like to say, why am I so obsessed with wanting to do this perfectly? Because maybe that's a deeper thing to work on. I mean, that's something that we've grown up in a world of materialism. And even if you're trying to be a great minimalist, I assume there's maybe deeper things that you have to work through.
Yeah, it's a symptom of something much deeper going on. I totally agree.
I think the one nice thing about minimalism, when you feel like you're doing it effectively, it's often this lever that it's a set it and forget it sort of thing. Remember when we interviewed the minimalist architect for our documentary, Frank, out in Tucson, and he had this house, and he said he took 3 years finding the couch and so he was obsessing about that couch, right? In fact, he couldn't find it, so he had it built custom just for his house. And the reason he did that, though, he said, I knew that I wouldn't have to if I did it right this one time, I wouldn't have to make another decision about a couch for the rest of my life. That decision is now made.
That's wild.
And I think the same thing is true. Like Ryan, you wear that outfit every day. And that decision is now made. In fact, it's one of the most difficult decisions that people have to make every day because they're making that in the morning. You get decision fatigue. Do I wear this blouse with these shoes? And do I, whatever it is. And all of a sudden, you've used up 7 or 8 important decisions in the morning because you didn't have it set and forget. In the morning, you just wake up and you put that shirt on, you put those pants on, you do something with those shoes.
Well, and it looks great.
Thanks, man. What's interesting is minimalism, it helps me, it frees my mind to obsess about other things. You know what I'm saying? So
that's the healthy obsession thing,
right? Exactly. So I don't. If you're obsessing about minimalism, like you said, Tyler, like there's something deeper going on. Because minimalism for me is a set it and forget it type thing. Where now I have the mental capacity to obsess about other things.
Yeah.
Well, Bree, I'm gonna send you a copy of our minimalist rulebook. It's free, so anyone can download it. theminimalists.com/rulebook. Because I think it's also important to set up some boundaries or what I would just call some limits on what's going on with your clothes. So we have a couple rules in there. One in particular is called the wait for it rule. So if something costs more than $30, I try to wait 30 hours to buy it. If it's more than $100, I try to wait 30 days.
Yeah,
and,
so wise.
And it's because we feel so impulsive. We see it right there. It's a click away. I mean, literally, it's one click shopping. It will, and I live in Los Angeles. It'll arrive the same day sometimes. Instant gratification, right?
Yeah.
And so I want you to delay gratification, because what you might realize is that, wow, the thing I thought I needed, the thing that I obsessed over, has now become the object of distraction for me, or worse, the object of discontent. So enjoy the Minimalist Rulebook, theminimalists.com/rulebook. You can download it there for free. Adam in Long Island has a question for us.
What I find challenging is I have many items, different clothing options that I could probably consolidate if I got rid of those and got something else to take over that place. For instance, I have more in the Northeast, so it's cold and our weather is drastic, so I have a rain jacket and a warmer jacket, and then I have a dress jacket for work. So, but the problem is they're not suitable to be switching back and forth. But if I got rid of those and purchased something that was easier or more versatile, it might make sense. But then I fall into that whole consumerism and buying stuff and then buying more stuff and getting rid of stuff. So I'm kind of stuck. I know in the last episode you just talked about you're getting rid of all your socks and you're buying these new socks. And it kind of sparked that interest and that knowledge. And I was just wondering, what suggestions do you have? Should I just get rid of it and buy new stuff? Or should I just use up the stuff I have?
So Tyler, what Adam he mentioned here about the socks thing is once a year I just get rid of all my socks because they've worn out and I buy 10 new pairs. So it's different from what he's sort of obsessing about, which is I've got this thing, but it's not perfect, and I could buy the perfect thing, and it would be better for me. And I think that's what we really get caught up in fashion, and especially with the things that are trendy, because the thing that is trendy today is going to be far from perfect tomorrow. Yeah. Right. And you're really highlighting a lot of these things that are very of the moment. And in fact, now that the coronavirus has hit, your account has slowed down because the material which you mined to start these conversations isn't out there as much, right?
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty much overnight gone away. Yeah. I mean, and I made a joke about like, oh, so nobody's going to church or even really wearing shoes anymore because everyone's sitting at home. I mean, even me, like I've maybe worn one pair of shoes over the past 4 months because I haven't really needed to leave my house or been forced to not leave my house. Yeah. I hear what he's saying. Like I at least empathize with kind of the wanting to over research or buy the perfect thing, or like I always search for the top rated whatever. Yeah. And at a certain point, you just kind of got to pull the trigger. But if he's got jackets, like if we're talking about his exact question, like if he's got jackets in the Northeast and they're functional, I would challenge the desire to want to buy the perfect jacket. Yeah. Because like you said, fast fashion comes and goes. I talked to my friend Whitney Bauk, who is a writer at Fashionista. She's the one that gave me this fake name. And she cares all about ethical fashion. And we've been able to talk about how terrible fast fashion is for the environment and for the people that work on it. I mean, it's literally getting the cheapest possible labor, the cheapest possible materials, and creating it within the time frame that the trend is popular, and then it goes away. Yeah. And it's disposed who the hell knows how. And so I would, and I don't do this perfectly either, but I would challenge the desire to buy the perfect thing if you already have the functional thing.
I'm the worst person to ask about this. My wife calls me a jacket slut. It's the one area it's the one area of my life where I'm probably not a minimalist. I think I have 9 jackets, which is way too many. And especially since I live in Los Angeles,
the nights are cool though.
Right. I mean, in the winters especially, I'm like, I've got a jacket for like every 8-degree increment. This is my 105-degree jacket.
Gosh, but you look so much better in outerwear though. It's like I'm obsessed with vests because I get hot all the time, but I also like to keep my core warm. And I feel like you never have to iron anything. If you wear a vest, you never have to iron a shirt. You can, I mean, it's mild throughout like all seasons, and I'm kind of the same. I'm probably a vest slut if you were a jacket slut, but big fan of outerwear. I mean, I get how you have gotten to that title.
I love, you talked about this with Breeze, the delayed gratification. So I think that's always a good thing to implement in your life if you are having these desires or these impulses to buy new stuff. But it comes down to what are Adam's rules? Because like I'm trying to look at his question and apply it to my own life. And what comes to mind for me is every time I go to Blue Bottle, they have this beautiful scale. They have this beautiful teapot. It's digital. You can choose the temperature.
The kettle.
Yeah, the kettle. So I actually got my kettle and my scale from Blue Bottle like 2 or 3 years ago, but they've switched out.
They've improved.
Yeah, and now they have these beautiful, sleek, modern. And every time I see them, I'm like, I'm going to replace my kettle and my scale because these are so beautiful. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, like I know that Josh, you are much more concerned about aesthetics than I am. Yeah. So you might look at it, Josh might look at it and say, you know what, because this fits in my home and because it's beautiful and it fits my style, I am going to go ahead and replace these things and donate the old scale and the old kettle. Right. Where like me, I am more functional. So like none of my plates match at home. My socks don't match. Speaking of socks, you know what I do? I buy like very bright socks, but they never match because one will always wear out. And if I had to replace socks every time, like then you got to throw out both socks. So if they don't match, it's okay if one sock wears out. I still got half of the set that I could wear with something else. So
that's advanced.
Yeah. So that is those are my rules. That's my approach. So Adam, the question is like how do you want to live your life? And like that's how you make these decisions. No matter what though, I think that delayed gratification is something certainly people should implement more.
Totally agree. I think I differ from both of you a little bit in that if I was personally in Adam's shoes, I'd get rid of those jackets and get a new one. And here's why.
Get rid of 3 and buy the one perfect one?
There is not going to be a perfect one, right? But I would find one that is going to be more timeless. And we're actually going to, on the Maximal episode, we'll talk about timeless style and how that's not actually a thing. But I would find something that's more appropriate, that's going to last you for a longer period of time, but also that you feel good in. Because right now it sounds like he doesn't feel good in anything he's wearing, and somehow it's hurting his confidence or whatever.
That's valid.
That's a great point.
I'd find a new home for those things where someone else will actually get value from them because you're no longer getting value from those things. I would find a new home for them, so I wouldn't just throw them away. And if they can have a new home, someone else might get value. Just because you're not getting value from the thing doesn't mean that someone else won't get value from it in the future if you let it go. And your willingness to let go, in a way, then, is a willingness to add value to other people's lives by letting it go and then replacing it very intentionally, realizing whatever you bring in won't be perfect, but you'll keep it for a longer period of time. You'll probably feel better in the thing that you're wearing as a result. Yeah. Adam, I'm going to send you a copy of our book. It's called Essential. It's an essay collection with 150 essays, 12 areas of intentional living. And one of the essays in there is specifically about clothes. It's about the favorite clothes of a minimalist. And I think you'll find value in that. So if you want the audiobook version of Essential, we'll send that to you. It's over 6 hours long. Or if you want the ebook or the book, we're happy to send those to you as well. Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It is time for our lightning round where we answer your text messages. You can text your questions and comments to 937-202-4654.
Yes, indeed. Those texts go to both of our phones, and we personally reply to as many as we can. We even respond to some here on the podcast, like this next question. By the way, Tyler, during the lightning round, this is where Ryan and I do our best to answer every question with a short, shareable, less than 140-character response. We put the text. Yes, very pithy.
Yeah.
we put the text of these minimal maxims in the show notes so they can copy and share our pithy answers on social media.
All right.
And you can find all of our minimal maxims in one place now, minimalmaxims.com.
I think there's a drinking game like every time you hear the word pithy on our podcast.
Yeah. Sorry, I think I broke the seal on that one. Sorry.
Take a shot of NyQuil.
That's right. That's right. Our question here is from Brian. How do we get in touch with our own personal style so that we don't fall for the tricks and manipulation from advertising?
Now, really, we can just maunder on a bit. We'll give them something pithy here, but let's talk about this because there are a lot of tricks. I mean, the reason we start our show with advertisements suck is because we're just not a fan of advertising for us. It doesn't work for us. It's not a judgment on someone else who wants to do advertising. And I've also realized there's a lot of manipulation there, and And I find that it's easier for me to be able to talk about, hey, I own a Toyota, because they're not paying me to say I own a Toyota. And in fact, I'm paying them. But in a weird way, that actually leads to my pithy answer here is, are companies paying us to wear their logo, or did we pay them for the privilege of advertising on our bodies? And so I think quite often we're trying to signal something. We buy the... there's $100, multi-$100 t-shirts, or some of the pants that you put on the Preachers and Sneakers Instagram. It's like $700 pants.
Sweatpants, yeah.
Yeah, sweatpants.
Wow.
I've owned cars that are less expensive than that.
Right.
and so here's the thing. And they also have logos. So I paid $700 to advertise for Louis Vuitton or whoever,
to further someone else's dream.
Let's talk about
that. Vision. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to reconcile why you would ever pay $800 for sweatpants, especially for one with a logo, unless they were Internet of Things, completely kitted out type sweatpants that helped you do your taxes or walk your dog or something.
Yeah.
I studied marketing in undergrad, and so I at least appreciate the process of marketing and understand like the utility of marketing. Like companies need people to sell and advertise for their products if they want to succeed as a company.
I'm totally fine with marketing, totally fine with selling, not great with advertisements. But I have a very long 4,000 word essay on this. We won't dive into the details of it. But and so in a way we are marketing for that company without even knowing that we're doing it.
Yeah. I really want to be in the practice of asking myself why I wear, post, buy something, because so much of that is at play and we don't even understand it, or don't even understand how a brand name affects our psyche. So like even the past couple of years, like Lululemon makes really comfy clothes, and for some reason the way they market makes me feel like I need that pair of pants or shirt for that tiny little, I mean, I'm wearing the shorts now, that tiny little logo that makes me feel like, oh, I've got some level of status and I've got these really high quality pair of shorts that not everybody could afford.
Yeah.
I want to know what that is, and I want to be constantly asking myself if I'm falling into that. I mean, I think that's what you're getting at is at least we should have intention with why we choose to buy something or post about something. Or
I think the Lululemon is actually a good example where they have a logo, but they go out of their way to sort of tone it down. It's not very flashy. It's not a giant pony on my chest or whatever. But it's still there, and it's their version of branding. And I own a Lululemon jacket, of course. And what I can tell you, in fact, they offered to give it for free, and in fact, they gave it to me for free. So I just donated the same amount to the Against Malaria Foundation for the jacket.
That's outstanding.
And the reason I do that is because I don't want. I want to be able to say, hey, I have this Lululemon jacket. I wouldn't feel good if I just got it from them for free and then started talking about it. It would feel like an advertisement. Yeah. But I like the jacket. I think it's fine. But I actually wish there was no logo on it at all. Like it's a very tiny, very subtle logo. But I prefer to be logo-less because I don't care whether you think it's an Armani shirt or a JCPenney shirt. It's what I feel comfortable in. That's what's important to me.
I think it's crazy that we feel like we can choose a brand to represent who we are as an individual.
Right.
But then you end up becoming like everyone else.
And then the company sells for $1 billion
yeah.
to a private equity holding company. Like I also want to, I think a lot of people that aren't minimalists struggle with just even the tiniest bit of identification with the logo. So like I'm even thinking about Lulu, tiny little logo. But if I saw the same shirt or jacket with like a Russell logo or something that said Sam's Club on it, there's something in me that says, that seems cheap, or that seems like I don't want people to see me wearing that. I think a lot of people struggle with that. And I think that's the inherent issue. It's like that brand means nothing as a human.
Yes.
That should mean nothing to us. Yet for some reason, a lot of us fall into this trap of I'd rather pay $80 for the Lulu logo than $19 for the Russell logo or the Walmart logo or something.
That actually kind of leads into my pithy answer, which is what you wear isn't as important as what you do. And you could wear those off-brand logos and still be a very likable, a very popular person. In fact, I think about Wrangler and how Wrangler in high school, like my dad was so control over my outfits because like I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and they have this term worldly, which basically if you're not a Jehovah's Witness, then you're worldly. Yeah. So any clothing that I would wear that looked a little bit outside of the religion, he didn't want me wearing worldly clothes. So we'd go to Walmart and he'd buy me Wrangler jeans, and I felt like crapping them because I'm like, oh, these are Wrangler jeans. But now, like I forget who it was I saw, like it was probably Matt Carney or somebody, like pulling off Wrangler jeans.
Yeah.
And you know that you can get at Walmart, and
the Kith by my house was selling Wrangler jeans recently.
Yeah,
and
so we call them stranglers because they're kind of tight, in certain areas.
Now, so one last thing before we wrap up this minimal bit. what do you think about our future president, Kanye West? He just did a deal with Gap, apparently.
Yes, he did.
And so, like, this is multiple layers of logos and signaling and culture and fashion and old and new and supply chains and everything else.
Yeah.
Sort of, it's this gumbo of man. I see a lot of Instagram posts about to come up on your feed.
Yeah, I reposted a tweet that I said recently, and people freaked out about it. Basically, like, Kanye West would never do a thing for publicity. And there's a lot of people in the comment section that are defending, like, who are you to question his faith? Who are you to question, his intentions around running for president? And all I said was, like, look, I'm at least just raising an eyebrow about why Kanye West is running for president.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about it right now.
Yeah, we're talking about it right now. And Kanye loves people talking about him and what he's doing. But also, to his credit, Kanye's playing chess. I mean, Yeezy, for the longest time with Nike, didn't do that well. Like, his Nike Air Yeezys are really popular and resell for a ton. But Nike didn't really have a great relationship with Kanye. But then he went to Adidas, when Adidas at the time, nobody really cared about. I mean, globally, they were a huge brand. But as far as in the streetwear market, they kind of were irrelevant. He goes there, and now it's $1 billion brand, Yeezy. He does Sunday service, and they're like, well, this feels like a cult. But then he does this massive tour with all this publicity, and now he's publicly, professed his faith, and now he's brought on this whole other demographic of people that before would have written him off, like during the College Dropout album years, Christians, I'm sure, would have never given him the time. But now he's appealing to both sides in a lot of ways. And so it's hard for me as like a natural cynic to not be like, this feels like he at least knows that he's going to get publicity from this.
Right. Sure.
And obviously I can't know his art. I can't know his intent, but there's a lot of characteristics of a duck to not be like, is this a duck? I mean, because, he's got super gaudy, intense tours. He's got a wife that has her own level of publicity and has a reality show that's incredibly popular. There's no denying that he loves the spotlight. And again, it's not a bad thing. The one thing I do have an issue with is using faith as a bargaining chip to try to win over a certain voting block. And I think that's what a lot of people are raising an eyebrow at, is like, did you just do all of these Christian themed things in order to gain approval from a pretty significant segment of voters, and now you're very quickly announcing that you're running for president? It just seems like a lot of things are playing together.
It reminds me of Trump in 2012, where he like started to make the run for president, but it was very similar to where it was people like blew him off.
Yeah.
So
it's very much from his handbook, Trump's handbook.
Yes.
I mean, they're very similar people.
Yeah.
Large totally. Egos, run businesses before, not afraid to be controversial. I mean, Kanye wearing the MAGA hat, I mean, people freaked out about that, but him and Kim are now billionaires. Like, he's playing chess.
Yeah, maybe
right in front of us.
Or maybe. I don't know. I mean,
it appears that way. I agree.
It does,
I never looked at it that way.
I agree that it definitely appears that way, or it could just be a series of dominoes that have all just sort of tumbled in one direction. I'm not sure. But the reason I bring it up, and we'll end with this, there are a lot of people that I don't know. I'm really just fascinated. I brought this up earlier. I'm fascinated with people who inspire other people. And there are people who do it well. There are people who don't do it well. There are people who do it well but with the wrong intentions. I think of Waco, for example, which, by the way, if you saw, I don't know if you saw the 6-part series.
We watched it in one night.
Tyler
So
Kitsch.
good,
I mean, he was born to play that role.
Outstanding.
Unbelievable.
So good.
And so I even look at someone like David Koresh and see the sort of charisma and there are actually things you can tweeze out, say he did this right, and there's this whole belief backing system that was clearly wrong, and a lot of things he did wrong, but you can tweeze out even the good things from someone as wrong, as crazy as someone like David Koresh. And I look at that, but I also look toward a lot of pastors today, and even though we might have different beliefs, I look at someone like Erwin McManus or Judah Smith or Chad Veach, and look at the way they communicate. But not just them. I look at people like Tony Robbins and see how how they communicate effectively, oratorially especially, and I try to bring out the I don't know, the best parts of it. I wrote down this quote. This is from the criticism section of our Wikipedia page. This is from the New Yorker.
That's when you've made it.
Yeah,
That's right.
The New Yorker, they said, the Minimalist events are halfway between a TED Talk and a hipster megachurch sermon.
I actually find that as a compliment.
A lot of the same attendees, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting because if I thought you would do it, I would totally start having weekly podcasts in LA, and it would be borderline church service without the dogmatics behind it.
Oh, and there would be principles and values and things like that.
Right. Like totally.
And so I like the idea of doing live podcasts or different things. I'm not a fan of pre-prescribed systems in place, and I think we're actually seeing a lot of that right now with the coronavirus and the quarantine, and you're seeing even religion is I say religion specifically, not spirituality, but religion, the way that people gather has now changed. Everyone is sort of gathering online in a way.
Yeah.
And what the thing that inspired your Preachers and Sneakers Instagram account, that's how everyone is consuming their sort of religious services now, right?
Yeah. And it's I don't know what the future holds with that, but it really forced most churches to get on board with the digital form of church, because for the longest time, I think Judah Smith specifically, there was kind of an air of rejection towards what he was doing, like building church homes, saying, hey, you can have church across the country and
in your living room.
In your living room. And a lot of, I think, traditional people that do traditional church, like, dude, there's nothing to replace in-person community. Like, you can't be so isolated in your own home and actively be involved with the church. But now, since that's the only option, I think a lot of people are coming around with, or at least wrestling with the idea. It's like, what does this look like now? Because we don't know how long this is going to last. And Judah had the jump on a lot of people. And I think
for sure.
He had a really good pithy quote that I'm going to steal from him. But he said, in some interview, he said, I think the church should stop spending millions to reach thousands and instead spend thousands to reach millions. And it's like, dude, that's a good freaking quote.
Right. Although, I think both things can be true. You can do this thing online, like Ryan and I do most of what we do online, but there is no substitute for the in-person events that we do.
Yeah.
We've done 9 tours over the last 10 years. We've got our 10th one coming up later this year in November. And nothing, yes, it's not cost effective for us. It doesn't reach nearly as many people. Our biggest tour, we had 75,000 people show up on our biggest tour. I can record one podcast and it goes out to many, many, many more people than that, right?
Yeah.
We spent an entire year on the road to reach 75,000 people in person. It was literally 10 months, 119 events in 100 cities, 8 countries, and it's literally me and Ryan driving around in his Toyota Corolla, right?
Yeah.
And so while I agree with the sentiment that I would reach more people, the depth isn't necessarily there.
Yeah.
And so there's I think what we have to acknowledge is there's probably room for both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would imagine as an introvert, you were super energetic after that world tour, right?
I got depressed for a month.
Dude.
Did you really?
Yeah.
So like I'm thinking, like, I heard you say on another conversation that you were very much an extrovert, and I agree. Like, I need interaction with real people in real life, and this is why quarantine has been so hard for me. Like, I've been in a depression because I love my wife, and my wife is everything to me. But there is something about being in groups of people that is hard to get at home with maybe just one other person. Yeah. And I totally don't think that church home could be a complete replacement, but I think I agree with Judah's sentiment that, like, dude, we've been building some gaudy ass structures to reach 5,000 people when we really could be investing in spreading our message at scale.
Right.
And I think he's doing a good job of that. And you brought up a lot of the communicators. I agree, they're outstanding communicators, and of course they're going to build huge platforms and have huge followings. I just hope that they're using that platform for good, and I hope that they're using those communication skills and talents to further the message that God loves everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I do want to talk to you more about that, using it for good in particular. So when we get on this Maximal episode, we'll talk about it, because we had one Patreon supporter in particular. He said, you guys, sometimes you recommend the War of Art, which is a book by Stephen Pressfield.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, but there's religious undertones, or he mentions religion somewhere in the book, and I just grew up in this religious tradition that I felt battered in. And so there are some times where people feel battered by their religion, and so they're instantly, this whole conversation we've had so far is probably turning them off, because even though Ryan and I, again, share radically different beliefs around this, we share similar values, and what we'd like to do is explore these different paths.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfortunate if you're not willing to even explore these paths because maybe some past trauma. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well.
It's interesting because I actually have that sentiment with War of Art. Like, it's a great book up until that last chapter.
Oh.
Because that last chapter is like, it gets a little religiously woo-woo-y. And
but the rest of it is so practical.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I have the same exact sentiment, because I am kind of traumatized from being raised as a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how I can hold space for both, though.
Well, let's talk about that if we have a chance. Also, we've got some listener tips and our added value segment here in a moment, but we have some surprise questions this week, like, should pastors wear $5,000 sneakers? Is Marie Kondo stylish? I've got some opinions on her folding method that I want to talk about.
I love how, like, recently we've been doing a lot of Marie Kondo questions.
Well, we have questions coming in.
In the Maximal segment.
What are some examples of timeless outfits? So we'll talk about timeless, trendy, maybe. How do brands affect people's free will for choosing clothes? How do we see some clothes trends come back into style, or why do we see them come back into style? So the things that were really popular let's just hope the 2000s don't come back into style, right?
What the heck were the 2000s? The Jinkos were 90s.
90s, yeah.
True religion.
True religion.
Oh,
Yeah. Bedazzled jeans.
Yes.
Yeah.
We got to talk about that. The things that were trendy not that long ago are hideous now.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the things that are going to be hideous in the not too distant future. Also, do you feel aspects of the minimalist aesthetic creeping into trendy clothing? How do you feel about that? And can simplicity be purchased? Plus, Tyler is going to review my footwear and Ryan's footwear. He'll give us a score of 1 to 10, I think, and tell us whether or not we're Instagram
Real
worthy.
meaningful stuff. Yeah.
Don't forget, I slipped you that $10 bill
That's
before
right,
this interview.
All right, we got that and a million more questions for Tyler Jones. If you want to hear that, check out our Maximal episode on the Minimalist private podcast this week. It's a completely separate podcast, and it's just a couple bucks, and it's the most honest way for the Minimalists to earn an income, because we don't believe in advertisements. So we make money only if you find value in and support what we create. Head on over to theminimalists.com/support to subscribe and get a personal link so that our private podcast plays in your favorite podcast app. Ryan, what else you got for us this week?
Here are some voicemail comments and tips from our listeners. Check them out.
Hey there, I am just listening to some of your older podcasts, and I came across one where a caller was wondering about letting go of baby clothes. One of the things that I've put in place, one of the rules that I've made for myself, is that in order for me to hold on to things from my daughter's childhood, which I'm a person who is nostalgic, I like to hold on to things. I still have the flower dress that my grandma made for me when I was in my aunt's wedding, and this rule kind of goes along with that as well. But I like to have a picture, a good picture of the item that kind of gives a snapshot in time instead of just having an item in a box. There needs to be a good picture to go along with it, to give it some context, to age the item, and just to give it a little bit more meaning. So, for example, I've held on to just a couple of my daughter's outfits from when she was really little, and I have really good photos of her in those outfits. And I just feel like it gives it a lot more meaning than having a pile of clothes that really have no relation to her. To actually have a photo to go along with the cute little outfit, it just kind of sparks those memories a little bit more. The same thing with her artwork. When she was little, I saved all of her artwork, and it piles up after a while. It's really fun when they're really little, but as they get older, you realize that you have tons and tons of this artwork. And I started scanning things. I would date them and things so that I would have an idea of when they came from. But once they pile up, you really lose track of when they made those items, how old they were, what school were they in, and they lose their real sentimental value if they don't have a story to go along with them. So her daycare used to send pictures of them making their artwork. And so I've held on to just a few pieces that I have really good photos of her actually making the item, so that, you know, in the future, her and I can pull those out and look at the picture and be like, oh, you know, do you remember this when you were making this? And look at the item at that time. And just keep a few things instead of keeping everything. And then I scan everything else. Sooner or later, I'll put it together into a photo book, or maybe I won't, but at least I have a scan of it if I ever want to take a look back, or if she wants to look back and try and remember some of the things that she made.
Hi, Josh and Ryan. My name's Alana from Rochester, New York. I'm just calling in to share with the world that I've been becoming more sustainable and trying to use less physical items, things that are wrapped in plastic, things that are store-bought or brand new. I found this really great website called Marley's Monsters. It's a small family-run business that's in Oregon, and you can order all sorts of awesome, sustainable goods from her website. I just ordered cloth paper towels that are reusable, washable sponges, some hair scrunchies, some reusable straws. So there's some really great items if people want to check that out and be more eco-friendly.
All right, y'all. Thanks again to Tyler Jones for joining us today. I guess the best place to check you out is at PreachersNSneakers on Instagram.
Yeah, that's the best. Or Twitter, PreachersNSneakers with no vowels. For some reason, the name, they won't let you have that long of a name.
We'll put a link to it both in the show notes. Is there anywhere else we should send folks right now? Your podcast.
Yeah, I've got a podcast cleverly named the Preachers&Sneakers Podcast, where we talk a lot about some of the same things like consumerism and capitalism, celebrity culture, sustainable fashion. Yeah, I've talked with several people there that talk really eloquently about ethical fashion, which I think is something that a lot of Christians ignore. So there's some Christian themes there, but there's also some, we're all kind of questioning these things and trying to discuss more nuanced topics. That's my goal, is to get people not only to laugh, but also to think about things that maybe they've known to be gospel beforehand. So the Preachers&Sneakers podcast is probably my favorite part about running the account.
Oh, I love it.
And
I loved your conversation with Kate recently.
She is the best.
Yeah.
Woof.
Yeah.
I
want to see if we can get her on the podcast. I had Jess reach out to her, I think.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
She's outstanding. She is, I even told her in the conversation, like, she's a living example of why the prosperity gospel is false. And
I want to disagree with you about that. So we're going to do that on the Maxwell episode.
Okay, good.
But I love the sentiment. I think we might agree violently. Yeah. But we'll get there via different paths.
Okay. Well, yeah. All that to say is she's one of my favorite guests that we've had on. She might be my favorite guest that we've had on the podcast.
We'll put a link to your podcast in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, guys, for having me. This is fun.
All right, for our added value this week, Ryan, I figured, I was just trying to think back, what adds value to my life almost every day? I still have Pandora, which
you're such a hipster.
Doesn't give me any clout. Like, it's basically,
it's funny.
Pandora's the new vinyl.
Yes, I was gonna say, dude. Like, Pandora went from like being lame and only old people used it to like everyone moved to Spotify, but now it's like coming back around.
Well, and here's why I use Pandora: is they have, for me, the best algorithm. There's 2 channels I listen to regularly. Yeah. And so every morning, Bex and I, when we have a coffee and we're reading together, we put on the Cigaros
channel. I'll have to check it out.
Yes.
They're so good.
And for whatever reason, the algorithm on Pandora works better than anywhere else, and it plays the best soundtrack to my morning every morning.
Awesome. Dude, he went and saw Cigaros in concert in Cincinnati. Yeah. Didn't even know who they were.
And it was
what is this?
Yeah.
It was a religious experience.
Yeah. And then the next day he was like, I saw this amazing band, Cigaros, and I was in Ohio. I'm like, why didn't you tell me they were in town? Like, I would have went with you.
It was amazing. Yeah. But yeah, you have to check out their Pandora channel. Every morning I turn it on. Bex and I would just, and at night I listen to an Aquilo channel. You know Aquilo? Oh, you'll love them. Aquilo. It's I don't even know how to describe it. It's really chill, atmospheric singer-songwriter. It's gorgeous. Stuff. So yeah, we'll put a link to Pandora. Hopefully, I think we can do the Cigaros station in the show notes as well. Real quick, for right now, here's one thing that's going on in the life of the Minimalists. My writing class is opening back up. I only do this 2 or 3 times a year. It's called How to Write Better. It's a 4-week writing class. You can't get in it right now, but you will be able to soon. It opens up July 31st and August 1st for 48 hours only. First 100 students. If you're interested in that, I will give you a bit of a warning so you don't feel like I'm just trying to heavy sell you on this. It is it requires a considerable amount of time, 7 to 10 hours a week for those 4 weeks. If you're willing to put in the work, I can show you how to write better over a 4-week period. I've had everyone from high school students to people with English as a second language take the class, all the way up to medical doctors and grad students take the class. And I think a rising tide lifts all boats. And people started writing in to me after we wrote our first couple books and saying, can you show me how to write better? And I have a lot of questions about writing, and as opposed to responding to every 1,000-word email, I just started this class many years ago where I taught people in person. We've automated the class now. We have a whole community around it, and you can find details, and you can download the free ebook as well, 11 Ways to Write Better, over at howtowritebetter.org. If you sign up for that email list over there, we'll let you know when the class opens up. You can follow The Minimalists on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Minimalists. Come to one of our live podcast shows. Visit theminimalists.com/tour to find a city near you. If you have a question, comment, or a minimalism tip for our podcast, email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. You can comment on this episode at youtube.com/theminimalists. And if you want our show notes in your inbox, sign up for our email list over at theminimalists.com. We'll never send you spam or junk or advertisements, but we will send you our Simple Sunday emails whenever we send those out. We just sent one out recently with this new essay, a really short one, but it's called Too Many Screens, and it's a commentary on. Did you see the Ronnie Chang stand-up special?
Yes.
It's so.
I've been talking with him recently.
Really?
He follows me. Yeah.
Oh.
He is one of my favorites right now.
He's so good. He has the joke on there where he says every night in America is like a competition to see how many screens we can get between our wall and our faces.
Yeah.
And
we're not happy with any of them.
Right. It's like I've got my iPad and then my iPhone and then my laptop and the TV and then the Apple Watch. And so it's an essay sort of about that. You can find that over at theminimalists.com/screens. But sign up for the email list. You'll get that in your inbox.
I had this epiphany about the screen thing, because I do the same thing where I reach for my phone when I'm watching a movie.
Yes.
So what I've been doing recently is I put my phone like in a change tray that we have where I put my keys and wallet and stuff.
The 4-year rule.
Yes, the 4-year rule. Or foyer rule if you're Josh. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching, I think I was watching like Star Trek or something. And what happens is there's this roller coaster that happens with TV shows where it's like boring, and then it builds up, and then you get this dopamine where like it gets to this like plot point, and then it kind of comes down. And like that's the whole wave that I realize that I'm riding when I watch a show. But what's happening with my phone is that I want that dopamine hit. Yeah. So during the lull in the TV show, I'm like, I can get that dopamine hit with like social media or with the news or with, checking my email. And it just speaks to our impulses, the whole screen thing, man.
We're dopamine addicts in a way.
Yeah.
Do you think that has anything to do with the sneaker culture right now? There's some dopamine that's involved in that, right?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, buying things in general probably gives you a dopamine hit. I do the exact same thing with the movie. My wife cusses me out every time, not figuratively cusses me out for just. Dude, I can do both of these things at the same time.
Yeah,
we never can.
And you can't.
Absolutely not.
You know what I end up doing? I end up like because the plot point will hit, and I'll be like, wait, what happened? What did they say? So then I gotta put my phone down and rewind it.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, it's yeah.
All right, y'all. If you leave it today with one message, we hope it's this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
The Minimalists.